shall go forth Torah, exploring and unpacking the weekly Parsha. We're so happy to have you here in Rabbi Berkowitz's library as it is. We'll run the class similar to the way we've done it before. Rabbi will lead, pause for questions. We'll ask you to unmute when Rabbi or I call on you. And we look forward to a very informative hour. Again, welcome.
Thank you so much, Carolyn. Just one minor correction, not Rabbi Berkowitz's library, but JTS's library, and the historic Shokin Library of the Jewish people, where I'm sitting. So it's an honor and privilege to be sitting in JTS's library here in Jerusalem, back in our virtual Beit Midrash. Great to have you all again. As we start, I want to say Chodesh Tov. Wish you all a very, very happy month of Kislev. In about 23 days, we will be celebrating the festival of Hanukkah. So you can all begin preparing your latkes and Chanukiot. In addition, and perhaps most importantly, I want to say Mazal Tov to Carolyn Cantor, who became a Savta, a grandma, once again.
Oh, nice.
How many, Carolyn? Not that you're counting.
Thank you. Just in the past 24 hours. So Dylan is number 6, our 6th grandchild.
Okay. And thank you for being here, even with all that excitement going on.
I will say, in case a little person walks in the room at any point, my husband and I are juggling the 3-year-old right now. Mom and Dad are still at the hospital with Dylan Elliott. So thank you.
Okay, and lastly, since you're all my extended family, and I really feel very, very close to you all, I want to introduce a very, very special student that is on with us this afternoon from Jerusalem, and that is Susan Schneider. Sue, if you could put on your camera for a moment. Sue is my mother-in-law, my new mother-in-law. So I want you all to meet a very, very special person in my life. And it's great to have you, Sue. Thanks for joining us. These are all of my near and dear students from the United States, Canada, mostly in Florida, but we've got Texas, we've got Massachusetts, and we've got Toronto. So any other places that we have on right now that I'm missing? Okay, great. So great to see you all. This week's Parsha is Parashat Toledot. And before we jump into the topic that I've chosen, which you'll see from the source sheet that I sent if you had a moment to print it out. If not, I'm going to be sharing screen and you'll have the sources right on your screen. I've entitled this session Parashat Toledot, the blinding of Isaac. You recall from last week, we were talking about the binding of Isaac and how that affected everything playing out in Parashat Chayei Sarah. Okay, and now I want to take a look at the phenomenon of the blinding of Isaac and see how this in particular plays out in this week's Parsha. But before we jump in, I want to remind us all of the storyline of what we have in Parashat Toledot. So it's clear in our minds and right at our fingertips before we jump in to some of the nitty-gritty detail of the commentary that we're going to be looking at. So recall that our Parsha opens with Isaac and Rebekah. Rebekah becomes pregnant with twins that are wrestling in her womb. We could do a bit of a tag team storytelling. What happens when those twins are wrestling in her womb? Who can jump in? Come on, too shy. Toby, thank you.
It's unusual for this kind of group that nobody wants to talk. Rebecca goes to talk to God and ask him why this is happening and says that she'd rather not live. And God tells her that she is carrying twins that one of them will be the Lord over the other one. And I
Toby,
believe,
by the way, I love how you just said that. One of them will be the Lord over the other one. You'll see in a few minutes, what I mean by why I love how you formulated that. Good.
and I mean, that's essentially what happens.
Good. Okay, so Rebecca goes for this divine sonogram. As Toby said, she's told that there are these two sons in her womb that are wrestling with each other. Okay, one will serve the other. Those sons, as we know, are Jacob and Esav. Okay, Yaakov and Esav. And we know that from the beginning, there's this competition going on between the two brothers. And not only competition, but also some conflict. Immediately after their birth, we telescope to these brothers when they've grown up. And remember that Esav goes out on the hunt, he comes back, he's famished, and he is so famished, he wants something to eat. And his brother Jacob decides to take advantage of this very, very weak moment of his brother and says to his brother, give me your birthright and I'll give you some of the lentil soup that I'm making. And Esav caves in, he agrees, he sells his birthright for a bowl of lentil soup. And then of course we have the scheming that goes on between Jacob and his Jewish mother, Rivka. Rivka wants to dress Jacob up as his brother Esav. Remember, Isaac is about to give the blessing to the older child. And Rivka wants to be sure that her favorite, Jacob, is going to get that blessing. And so, of course, she dresses him up as his hairy brother Esav, sends him in. Isaac feels around, and from that sense of feel, identifies the child not as Jacob, but as Esav, even though it's the voice of Jacob. And of course, Jacob ends up with the blessing instead of his brother Esav. Esav comes back from the field and is heartbroken in pieces to discover what has happened. And we hear this primordial cry coming through the generations, Barcheni gam ani avi, bless me too, my father. Okay, so we've got the summary of the action that plays out in the Parsha. And what I want to look at with you is I want to jump off from the point of the blessing. That is when we are given the description, Vayehi ki zaken Yitzchak vatichena einav meiraot, when Isaac was old and his eyes were too dim to see. And what I want us to do is I want us to think about the metaphor of sight or lack thereof that plays out through the Parsha, through Isaac's life, in that it symbolizes a lack of vision, a lack of attunement, and a lack of sensitivity on the part of Isaac. It's not just physical eyesight that we're talking about, but it becomes symbolic of the entire person that we're dealing with in Isaac. We're also going to encounter in this study what I call the tale of two Esavs, one in which Esav is necessarily diminished and sidelined because ultimately this is God's plan, and the other in which we as readers of Torah empathize with Esav. And it raises the guiding question for us: to what extent do we shape a story based on our prejudices, fear, and our own blindness? Okay, so keep all of this in mind as we go forward. As I said, we're going to start with Genesis chapter 7, verse 1, when Isaac was old and his eyes were too dim to see. We're going to take a look at 3 different midrashim which give us the reason as to why his eyes were dim, why his eyesight was diminished. So I'm going to share screen now so we can pull up the sources. I'm going to make it just slightly bigger for us. Great. Okay, you can all see the blinding of Isaac. We're ready to begin. Okay, these three midrashim that I'm about to show you all appear in Rashi's commentary on this particular verse. Okay, Rashi, you remember, is the great medieval commentator, prolific commentator, commented on the vast majority of Tanakh. It's probably a whole school of Rashi that worked in writing this commentary. So he mentions these three different midrashim, and you're going to see how his diminished eyesight is attributed to three different sources. So the first says to us, why was his eyesight diminished? His eyes were too dim to see because of the smoke of these daughters-in-law who were offering incense to idols. Very, very easy. Always blame it on the daughter-in-law or daughters-in-law. What are we talking about? We're talking about Esav. Okay, Esav, who took to wife these Canaanite women. And we're told in this particular midrash that they were involved in idolatrous practices, burning incense to their gods. And so what did God, the God of Israel, do? The God of Israel diminished Isaac's eyesight so he wouldn't be so aggravated in his old age, that his son Esav intermarried. Rabbis were very, very concerned about Isaac being aggravated. And so they say that this is the reason that his eyesight is diminished. Okay, so we're going to blame Esav here. This is the reason why his eyes are weak. Now let's go on to the second source that we have. When Isaac was bound upon the altar and his father was about to slay him, at that very moment, the heavens opened, the ministering angels looked upon Isaac and wept, and their tears flowed and fell upon Isaac's eyes, which became dim. Okay, very, very powerful midrash, right? This image of Isaac being bound to the altar, right? The heavens open up and the angels themselves are crying when they see Abraham standing there with a knife about to kill his son. And the tears of the angels drop down into the eyes of Isaac, right? And later on, his eyesight becomes diminished because of those heavenly tears. Okay, so here we'll blame the angels. And then finally, source number 3, his eyes were dim so that Jacob should take the blessings. So who is the source of this impaired eyesight in the third midrash that we have? The source is God, right? Because what was the divine plan all along? The divine plan all along was indeed that Jacob should receive the blessing. Okay, raises the question about what it says about our God, right? Why, that God is sort of scheming behind the scenes to be sure that history goes in a particular way. I want to pause for a moment so that you can comment, ask questions, chime in on these 3 midrashim that I just presented. Anything that you find particularly striking, curious? Diane.
Yeah, it's a question. I mean, I thought of it with Cain and Abel. Now I'm thinking it this go round. I mean, if God really had a plan, why did he have this tension and this episodes happen where one of the brothers really, leaves the world of Judaism, et cetera, and same Cain slew Abel. If it's God, why is God doing those things?
Right. Great question. I truly wish I had the answer to your question. It's very, very curious that we have all of these machinations going on. And if this is indeed what God wanted, why couldn't God have made it simpler? From the beginning, why couldn't we have said that, the chosen child, just have Jacob be the firstborn, right? And have God acting in a more direct way in the story.
But this particular answer is the most valuable answer for me of the 3. God, it's God's will.
That it's God's will. Very good.
Yeah.
Joel Kimosabi.
please
Yeah,
jump in.
I've got to get that name changed. That's from my biology background. What strikes me is that it's not only Isaac's eyesight that's dim, but it also seems to be his whole intellect is dim. This is a guy, a child. Well, I mean, the last time you said he was 37, whatever. But I mean, his father tried to kill him. This would give anyone a psychotic break. I think that after that, either he already was or became a few French fries short of a Happy Meal, and all of these, he was not mentally stable after that, and all of these machinations are going around around him by his mother, by God, by Esav. All of this stuff is happening around him without him really participating in anything. And you really wonder, what does that say about, Yitzhak Avinu?
Good, Joel. Excellent. No. It definitely, there's no question that Akedat Yitzchak impairs his well-being, and certainly it influences and shapes his whole worldview. Okay, it's actually, what you said, Joel, is a perfect segue into the next source that I want to share with you. Another midrash that comes from Tanhuma that addresses this blindness. So let me pull up the sources again. Okay, and you'll see source number 4 for those of you who printed it out. And if not, you have it on screen now.
Let's see, did Murray have a question? Murray?
Carolyn?
Yeah, I did. Hello, Rabbi.
Boker Tov, Murray.
Can you hear me? Hi.
Yeah.
We're in a car driving to North Carolina, so this is interesting how we're trying to do this. What gets to me is I back up a step and say there's something wrong in the story to begin with. This whole idea that Esau was so famished that for a bowl of soup, he sold this birthright, which now later we're going through looking for explanations about how Yaakov, who already has his birthright if he sold it, and why that wasn't told to his father, why we're going through this whole thing, the charade later. It doesn't seem to make sense. A hunter, it's like he was on, he had to be near death or something to give up his birthright. And yet, if the birthright meant anything, and yet he is now, yet he didn't convey it to his father. At least we're not told that he conveyed it to his father, that he now had the birthright, that his other son gave it up. So now we're going through these contortions of how's he going to get it again, the blessing from his father. It just doesn't tie together very well.
Okay, so Murray, hold on. I'm going to ask you to hold on to that thought because we're going to get there. I promise you. Right now we're at this point of the story, but I'm going to take you all the way back to the beginning of the Parsha, and we're going to see how this plays out. So take a look at the next midrash, Tanhuma, source number 4. And here is what the rabbis teach, specifically Shimon bar Yochai. You find that one who is blinded is like the dead. Said Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai, God does not generally associate his name with the righteous in their lifetime, but only after their death. As it is said, as to the holy ones who are in the land, when are they holy? When they are buried in the ground in the land, they become holy. As long as they are alive, God does not associate his name with them, for God does not believe in them, as the evil impulse, that is the Yetzer Hara, will still mislead them. Only when they are dead, God associates his name with them. And yet we find that God associates his name with Isaac in his lifetime. As God says to Jacob, I am the God of Abraham, your father, and the God of Isaac. These are two understandings of this. The rabbis say he saw Isaac's ashes as though they were heaped on the altar. Rabbi Barchia says, since he was blinded, he was, as it were, dead because he was secluded in his house and the evil impulse ceased troubling him. Okay, there's a whole lot to unpack here. It seems that, each time we meet, we've got another disturbing line of the rabbis. This is certainly one of them. This notion that to be blind, it's as if one is dead. Okay, we need to constrain this in terms of this particular midrash, and certainly this is not what we believe as Jews today. But what they're saying here ties in very, very beautifully with what Joel was explaining before, with Joel's take on Isaac and the impact of Akedat Yitzchak. So who wants to jump in here in explaining this midrash? What did the rabbi say? Susan? Just take yourself off mute, unmute yourself.
Sorry,
Thank you.
there we go. Okay. I think that when you can't see, you can't participate in the activities of the world around you in the way that you used to. So perhaps it's a suggestion that Isaac's ability had become limited to the point where he did not have any power in that physical world.
Right, exactly. It's as if this paralysis has set in over Isaac. He's incapable of distinguishing night from day, right? But it's deeper than that. He doesn't detect nuances, not in human voices, right? Or in any other way. And it's as if he's dead. That the image that I find so striking in this particular midrash is it compares him to a sacrifice that was literally offered on the altar. And it's as if he's the ashes that are left over from the sacrifices. That's why what you said, Joel, I think is so illuminating here. When you think about the impact that this near-death experience had on him, the fact that his father was standing over him with a knife, right? Something was lost in this human being, right? Something very, very profound was lost. Susan?
Yeah, but we see that Isaac, other senses aren't diminished because he hears that the voice is the voice of Jacob and not Esau, whom he's expecting, and the texture of the skin is Esau, not Jacob. So his other senses seem to not be impaired the same way.
Right. So what I want to say on that is, look, one could say that he's very, very selective in which senses he's right. He's sharp on, and those that he's not so sharp on. But I believe that part of what's going on here is when it comes to the material and physical world, Isaac has heightened sense, particularly heightened sense. Okay, hold on to this idea. Okay, because there's something very, very powerful here that I learned from Chancellor Ismar Shorsh, Chancellor Emeritus of JTS, who wrote a wonderful Parsha commentary called Canon Without Closure. And if you don't have this on your Jewish bookshelf, you should have it on your Jewish bookshelf. I'm proud to have a signed copy of his. And he says something very, very powerful about this notion of Isaac being deeply connected to the material. So now I want to take hold of Murray's comment before, and I want to take you back to the very, very beginning of the story in source number 5. Okay, and this is when Rebecca goes for what I call the divine MRI to check out what's going on in her womb, the 2 children that are wrestling, and look at the exact words that she's told. Okay, here is what the MRI conveys to Rivka. Okay, and this is in God's words, remember. This is source number 5. Vayomer Adonai la, shnei goyim bevitnech, ushnei leumim mimeayich yiparedu, ulaom milom yamatz v'rav yavot tza'ir. And the Lord answered her, 2 nations are in your womb. 2 separate peoples will issue from your body. 1 people will be mightier than the other, and the older will serve the younger. What I want to focus on for a moment is this phrase, these last 3 words at the end of this verse, V'rav ya'avod sa'ir, what's translated here as the older will serve the younger. Okay, so I want to ask you, when you look at those words, Rav ya'avod sa'ir, is there another way of understanding what it says here? I need help from our Hebrew speakers.
Is Ya'avor mean past?
Stephen?
Is Ya'avor mean like pass? Like pass up? We'll go.
Yeah. Rav Ya'avod Sa'ir. Okay, so not Ya'avor, okay, but Ya'avod. Arvin?
How about that one will be stronger than the other?
Yes, one will be stronger than the other, but put the Hebrew words with the English, Arvin. Be exacting.
Okay. Let me just go back here.
The Rav Ya'avod Sa'ir.
Well, because if you go to, let me just find the language here. In 23, in 23, it says, I'm reading now from the text, mil'om ye'amatz. So doesn't amatz mean strength?
Okay, I don't want to go there. I want to focus on the three words. I don't want to make it more complicated than it is. Matt Weiss.
Is Rav like Harbe? More people will worship the younger, will follow the younger?
I like your midrashic direction, Matt. Not what I was thinking of, but I like that potentially. So I'm going to cut to the chase here. This is something that I learned with Diane Sharon, and I truly found this to Diane Sharon, who was a professor of Bible at the seminary when I first started teaching for JTS. And Diane Sharon pointed out in this magnificent class that Rav Ya'avod Sa'ir could mean one of two things. The older will serve the younger is traditionally how it's translated. So let's translate what that means. Who is the older child? Is it Esav or is it Jacob? Remember, Esav is the firstborn. Okay, he's the older child. And Jacob is called Yaakov because he takes hold of Esav's heel. So Esav is the firstborn. Esav is the older one. So the traditional reading would say that Esav will serve Jacob. That's what it means. Rav Ya'avod Sa'ir. However, if you put the emphasis on the words in a different way, it would be Rav Ya'avod Sa'ir. The older, the younger will serve. Meaning Jacob will serve Esav. Think about that for a moment. What is the bigger idea that's being communicated here? The bigger idea is that when God speaks, you've got to listen very, very closely, right? It's not what you might think at first glance, right? So what I'm saying to you is this verse can be interpreted in two polar opposite ways. One way could mean that Esav is going to serve Jacob, which is the way that we traditionally understand it throughout, the way that we want to understand it throughout our history. Because remember, Esav comes to symbolize the enemies of the Israelites and the Jewish people. Esav becomes a symbol of Rome, right? So we want to say that it's going to be Jacob that has the upper hand. But in truth, what Diane Sharon was teaching here is when you look at the pendulum of history, it swings back and forth between Jacob and Esav. It's never only the case that Jacob is triumphant, right? Sometimes Esav has the upper hand here. So I love that notion, right? That when God speaks, you got to listen a little more carefully. So it's not so clear that Jacob is going to be, ultimately the chosen one. We go on to source number 6. I want you to see how Torah describes each of these characters in their youth, or at least when they're becoming teenagers. Look at number 6 here. Vayigdelu hana'arim, vayhi Esav ish yodea tza'id ish sadeh. When the boys grew up, Esav became a skillful hunter, a man of the field, literally. Here, the translation is a man of the outdoors. V'Yaakov ish tam yoshev ohalim. But Jacob was a mild man who stayed in the camp, right? Literally, he was a dweller in the tents. And then we're told the following. Vayehav Yitzchak et Esav kitzaid bafiv, v'Rivka ohevet et Yaakov. Isaac favored Esav because he had a taste for game, but Rebekah favored Jacob. Okay, so what did we just learn about each of these characters? And what do we learn about the love of the parents for these children? Nadia and Shira.
Shira, your daughter wants to say something. Say it. Shira says it's not okay to have favorites, but she does say that you love her the best.
Very good. Okay, so definitely a warning against parental favoritism. We don't like parental favoritism, and yet we see it repeating itself from one generation to the next, right? It's deeply disturbing. And God essentially becomes the first role model for that, remember? When we see the Cain and Abel story. Remember who is the favored child there? It's Abel who's the favored child, and that brings about the first homicide. Now that's going to repeat itself, and that's definitely a warning for us. What else?
Murray, then Steve.
No, you already said it. I mean, the parents have two different views on who's their favorite, who should be in charge, who should inherit, for different reasons, I'm sure.
Definitely. Steve? Yeah.
There's two of us. I didn't have anything.
Oh, okay. I heard Carolyn say Steve, I'm sorry. Okay, so very, very specifically, okay, two things that we learn. First of all, in terms of the love that these parents have for each of the children, okay, Rivka's love seems unconditional for Jacob, right? She doesn't love Jacob for a particular reason. However, when it comes to Esav, Isaac loves Esav for a very, very specific reason. It's a utilitarian love. Why does he love that son?
He gives him his food.
Exactly. Ish yodea tza'id. This is the one who knows how to hunt. This is the one that's going to come back with the prime rib. Okay, this is the key, obviously, the key to Isaac's heart. Okay, and remember before we were talking about that material sense, that worldly sense. So we definitely pick up on that here. There's definitely a clue in the nature of Isaac's love for Esav. In addition, look at how both of these sons are described in very, very different ways. Joel?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that you have to think about this in the context of that world. If you were blind, if you really did not see well, you couldn't get your own food. You would starve. You would die. It was a sense that you had to have to continue your life. So of course he would favor the person that was going to be able to bring him the food to keep him alive.
Right. Good. Okay. So to give Isaac the benefit of the doubt, there's definitely that aspect to it as well. Phyllis?
Matt, certain children fill certain needs for parents.
That's beautifully said. Certain children fill certain needs for parents. Look at the snapshot that we're given of both of these kids, right? One kid, Esav, is the one that knows how to hunt, the one that's connected to the field, the one that's deeply connected to the material world, right? And then Jacob, who seems to be the more spiritual type, right? The more he is the more domesticated of the two. He is the stay-at-home kid. It's certainly very, very typical of our children to have very, very different personalities, So it's not surprising that we see that here in Jacob and Esav. I want to take you to the moment that Murray was talking about here, the spurning of the birthright. Okay, this is that fateful moment when Esav comes in from the field. Okay, and we're told, so he swore to him and sold his birthright to Jacob. Jacob then gave Esav bread and lentil stew. He ate and drank, and he rose and went away. Thus did Esav spurn his birthright. Right? Clearly, there's this internal critique of Torah here on Esav. Right? Yet, I also believe we've got a critique here on his brother Jacob. Why was Jacob so manipulative as to take advantage of this very, very weak moment of his brother? Right? This is not exactly a flattering portrait of either of them, of either Jacob or Esav, who was willing to just simply spurn his birthright for a bowl of soup. But right, like Murray said before, it seems that at least he felt that he was near death. Let's take a look at source number 8. You'll begin to connect the dots, see where all of this is going. Torah tells us in Genesis 26, verse 6, this is essentially a repeat of the story that we have of Abraham and Sarah going down to Egypt. Here, Isaac goes down to Gerar. When the men of the place asked him about his wife, he said, she is my sister, for he was afraid to say, my wife, thinking, the men of the place might kill me on account of Rebekah, for she is beautiful. Isaac sowed in that land and reaped 100-fold that same year. The Lord blessed him, and the man grew rich and richer until he was very wealthy. He acquired flocks and herds and a large household, so that the Philistines envied him. What ended up happening? The Philistines stopped up all the wells which his father's servants had dug in the days of his father Abraham, filling them with earth. And Avimelech, the king of the Philistines, said to Isaac, go away from us, for you have become far too big for us. Why am I showing this to you? Okay, this is giving us a window into the person that is Isaac. And in many ways, it's a very similar story, very, very similar to what we heard when Abraham and Lot come back from Egypt. Right? Remember, they wax greatly in their wealth when they come back. Their herdsmen begin fighting with each other. Abraham turns to Lot, says we need to separate. Lot lifts up his eyes, and he ends up going off to Sodom and Gomorrah, right? Which speaks to his relationship to wealth. Abraham, on the other, who also becomes wealthy, he is not changed by his wealth. He remains the same moral, ethical person that he was before he went down to Egypt, and ultimately he's rewarded for it. Here with Isaac, it's telling us that Avimelech expelled him because he was waxing too great. It was because of his wealth. And it's showing you how Isaac is deeply rooted and connected to that material world. It's a very, very troubling piece that we learn about Isaac here. And I believe all of this goes back to the experience of Isaac with Akedat Yitzchak. Okay, Toby, you're shaking your head in a very familiar way. I'm curious to hear what you're thinking.
Well, I was just thinking about, it's not exactly the same, but I've known a number of people who lost a parent in childhood or in their teen years, who tend to become very concerned with financial stability. And that so I kind of think that maybe it's the same kind of psychological effect, that kind of insecurity leads people to grasp after the type of security that they can create for themselves.
Right. So I believe that's exactly what's going on here. It's completely understandable for somebody who was the victim of such a traumatic event. One understands why he needs that stability, that material embrace in the world. Diane? Take yourself off mute. We can't hear you.
Things going here because I don't know how to turn my my
You did it.
picture around. My cause, I learned that Isaac was the first meditator.
First
He went
what?
out to the field, meditate. He
Right.
meditates. Well, this doesn't sound like a person that's completely, you know, in love with money and wealth.
Right. That comes from this notion that he was lasuach basadeh, right? He goes out into the field. And what was he doing in the field? He was obviously davening. Okay, so the rabbis want to show us how our patriarchs set the times for the 3 prayer services that we have. So that's part of where that's part of what sparks that particular midrash. Yeah. So I accept your critique here, your observation. We can't say that he's entirely material. He definitely does have, some spiritual side, but I believe that, that there is really something to this. Let's take it a step further. I want to go to the point where the blessing is stolen. Before that, right, source 9, this is where we're told about Esav's wives. When Esav was 40 years old, he took to wife Judith, the daughter of Beeri the Hittite, and Basmat, the daughter of Elon the Hittite, and they were a source of bitterness to Isaac and Rebekah. Again, it seems that he's spurning his tradition here, as it were. And then the episode of stealing the blessing, once the blessing is given, then Esav comes in from the field, and it says, Isaac was seized with very violent trembling. Who was it then, he demanded, that hunted game and brought it to me? And I ate of it all before you came, and I blessed him. Indeed, he is blessed, right? This is the bitter news that Isaac shares with his son Esav, says there's no other blessing left for you. However, in terms of the fullness of the blessing, we have this very, very interesting midrash that says to us, the blessings were dubious in Jacob's hands. When were they confirmed in his hands? When did they truly become blessings? Here, and Isaac called Jacob. And then the midrash goes on and said, Rabbi Eliezer, divorce bill is ratified only when it is signed and sealed, so that you should not say, if Jacob had not deceived his father, he would not have taken the blessings. And Isaac called Jacob and blessed him. Or another possibility of when the blessing truly becomes a blessing for him. The blessings were tenuously held in Jacob's hand, but when were they confirmed? Here, Esav said, my brother, let what is yours remain yours. The midrash here is jumping to Parashat Vayishlach, the reunion of the 2 brothers, when Esav says, right, you keep what is yours, right? Right, that is past history. Don't worry about it. Okay. Then we're told, source number 14, that Esav cried a loud and bitter cry. Look at what this particular midrash says. Whoever maintains that the Holy One forgoes just claims, may he forgo his life. God is merely long-suffering, but ultimately exacts justice. Jacob made Esav break out in a cry but once. And where and when was he punished for it? In Shushan, the capital, as it says, and he cried with a loud and bitter cry. Okay, what's going on here? How did we just jump from the story of Jacob and Esav to the story of Mordechai and Esther? Toby.
So what they're saying, because of the same language, is that the Jewish people were punished for Jacob's deception in taking the blessing from Esau, and it waited all those hundreds of years, but eventually that's why what happened in Shushan occurred.
Excellent, Toby. Okay, what the Midrash is communicating to us is that it's not the case that we live in a world of leit din v'leit dayan, that there's no judge and there's no justice. Indeed, the Midrash is teaching us there is justice. There is tzedek in this world. Tzedek may be delayed. It may not come immediately when we want it to come, but it will come. And when does it come? When is it that tzedek comes? When is it that it finally comes? Okay, a bit troubling, at least for Esav. It comes quite some time after this episode between him and his brother. It comes in the time when the Jews are in Persia, and we have Haman's decree, and we're told that Mordechai cried a great and bitter cry. And they say that that is an echo of Esav's earlier cry. Just as Jacob made Esav cry like that, so too are the Jews suffering now, that is 4th century Persia, right? Because of what it is that Jacob did to his poor brother Esau, right? That what goes around will eventually come around. The Midrash is quite striking on many levels, not the least of which is this notion that we have a sense of where this story needs to go, right? Ultimately, Jacob needs to be the hero because we want to push along. The chess pieces need to move in his directions, right? For Bnei Yisrael to come about and to be the partners in covenant with God and to receive the Torah at Sinai, etc., right? We need the story to move in a particular way. That is God's story. That is God's plan. But the beauty of all of this is that we also have the human story here, right? The sort of gray area of morals and ethics and values that certainly should be rubbing us the wrong way when we look at this, right? Jacob was not the most savory of characters in how it is that he gets his hands on the birthright, and then later how he gets his hands on the blessing, and that should trouble us deeply. And the rabbis were not blind to that, right? The rabbis picked up on that and latched onto it and realized that there needed to be some corrective here, right? In the span of history, there needed to be tshuva, there needed to be a correction. So I want to take us to the finish line with quotes from Chancellor Emeritus Ismar Shorsh, which I believe are right on the mark here. And they are said, those of you who remember reading Chancellor Shorsh's Parsha commentary, you remember that he was certainly a craftsman of the word and a poet. And here's what Dr. Shorsh writes. The blindness of which the Torah speaks in Isaac's dotage, which allows Jacob at Rebekah's instigation to steal Esav's blessing, is therefore not just a physical infirmity of old age, but also a lifelong aversion to matters spiritual. Rashi agrees that this condition goes back to his experience on the altar. This is intended to explain the permanent damage done to Isaac by his father's religious zeal. For the rest of his life, he chose to make his home in the temporal realm. True to his name, Yitzchak, he will laugh, wanted to enjoy life. Before we go on to the last source, what did Dr. Shorsh just say there? Remember what we've been saying about Isaac's materialism. Isaac taking refuge in physicality in the world.
Isaac
What
was
happened?
traumatized.
Yeah.
This
Yeah,
was a
happened?
trauma that he experienced and he carried with him for the rest of his life. And, you know, it's not uncommon for people with near-death experiences, especially, to carry that with them for all time, and for it to, whenever people who've experienced trauma never see the world the same way, and they don't see the world the way other people do. They have a tendency to live more in the moment and to savor the moment, because they say, tomorrow, you don't know what's come tomorrow. Tomorrow,
Okay,
you may
good,
not be
good,
here.
Nancy. So I just want to sharpen it just slightly, which is to say that it's a trauma rooted in religious fundamentalism. That's what Dr. Schorsch is saying. And because of that overzealousness on the part of Abraham, where he was ready to sacrifice poor Isaac, right? Remember, the knife was literally hanging over his head. Because of that moment, Isaac's reaction is to run, naturally, to run in the opposite direction. It makes complete sense. He doesn't want to have anything to do with this world of zealotry and fundamentalism, right? He's going to head in the opposite direction here. Okay, look at the final source that we have. The divinely guided history of Abraham's clan is predetermined and quite indifferent to individual virtue or suffering, right? That is, God's story needs to move along in the direction that it needs to go. Ineluctably, Esav is felled by a design beyond his control, and yet the author cannot help but identify with the suffering of those unfavored by history. God's moral economy does not always correlate with our human sense of justice. To recount this story from both the divine and human perspectives at one and the same time is the mark of a truly great writer and profoundly religious mind. I can't top that. So we have about 5 minutes left, and I want to put the ball in your court to hear your comments, questions, reactions. Murray?
Yeah, I love the midrash, I think it was, that talks about the tears of the angels blinding him. It's like crying over the way this was administered, this understanding of what Judaism was, or what God wants of his first follower of a new chance for society, for humankind. And they're crying, and this act, as has already been said, blinds him. It's so traumatic. It blinds him to the ability to know, I would say, right from wrong, evil from not, a moral compass. It becomes self-serving. Life becomes, instead of purposeful, it just becomes self-serving. Do what it is to make you happy. Do what it is what you need, and not worry. The opportunity was lost with that first, with the Akedah.
Exactly. He becomes ensconced in this mode of that which he can control. And what can he control? You know, it's that which is in the material realm, that which is in the physical realm. And it's not surprising, who is it that he favors? Who is it that Isaac favors? He's going to favor, right, the stronger one, the one that can go out, the one that can hunt, the one that can acquire. Another voice. I'd like to chime in. The reaction, comment. Don't hold back. This is your big moment here. Steve Finkelman.
So, you know, it's so many different arrows kind of coming in here. You have the challenge of huge human dysfunction of our forefathers, including trauma. But again, God causes trauma. They had this relationship with God. God could have healed Isaac also if he wanted to, but he chose not to. I mean, he created the trauma, but he decided not to intervene once again to do anything about it. And then you have this, then you have the rabbis reaching in, trying to find excuses. On top, which kind of like the beginning part of our talk was trying to find excuses, you know, the tears and the things like that. So it's like multi-layered things of, you know, I think what we would call like life, real life. Yeah.
Right. That's what I appreciate so much in the midrashic reading of the rabbis, that they truly hear the depth of human emotion in these stories. And that's what the Midrash is responding to. Remember, Midrash is not history, but it's responding, I believe, very, very sensitively to what the rabbis see as, imperfections in the story, imperfections in the derech. Arvin.
If we can go back to Rabbi Schwartz's 16, if it's not too bulky, I'd like if you could circulate that section of writing that he has on this, because it's hard to digest the conclusion that he reaches. That is that Yitzchak had an aversion to matters spiritual, lifelong. We know so little about Yitzchak's life. We know more about Abraham, more about Yaakov. The rabbis attribute the mincha, the practice of mincha, to him. When he blesses Jacob, he does talk about the blessings of God to Abraham. So I'd be curious where Rabbi Schorsch sources his conclusion that he had his aversion to things spiritual. I don't know if he elaborates on it in what you've mentioned in this canon without closure, but I'd like to see that. Because I don't know that I can agree with that yet. I don't have any reason to, I don't have any basis to say, yeah, you're right. He was not spiritual.
So
I'm not sure that he thinks that it's not that he's not spiritual. You can have an aversion to something and still do it. So he could have continued to do what he felt was his obligation, but doing it with an aversion as opposed to doing it joyfully and with a whole heart, kind of going through the motions. That's the phrase I'm thinking of. I think that this is a reference that Isaac did it kind of going through the motions. He didn't really feel it. And I think that that's what he carried from the Akedah.
He can
see, right. Yeah, I believe, Arvin, that I love how you just said it, Nancy. And I believe what Chancellor Schorsch is alluding to is this imbalance that for him, the scale was weighted much heavier on the material side versus the spiritual side. It's not to say that he was, like Diane pointed out before, rightly so, okay? It's not to say that he was totally a non-spiritual person, but that side of his personality was significantly diminished because of the trauma that he experienced. So Carolyn, if you have, I don't know if you've got access to the book. Oh no, you certainly don't.
I don't hear. I will have it on Monday though.
Right.
We'll follow up and we will get that to you, Arvin.
Arvin, I'm going to see if I could get it to you within an hour. I will do my best. Okay.
Okay, Matt. Thank you.
You got it. Okay. I want to wish you all Shabbat Shalom. I know we've got to wrap up. So great seeing you all again. Thank you for participating, for making the time. It's an honor and privilege to be part of this Beit Midrash. So,
indeed, this is really fantastic. We will take a pause next Thursday. Some of us will be celebrating Thanksgiving with one or